So chapters 10 through 12 are Daniel's fourth vision, and it contains some of the most detailed prophecies of all of the Bible. Most of what we are going to find here in these chapters has in fact already happened in history. We call this a vision, but it's really a message that Daniel was given by an angel, probably the angel Gabriel, who spoke to him in chapter 9. Daniel is going to be shown Israel's future about 170 years from his time. But then there's a sudden leap out to the distant future in the last days and a final battle between the rebellious kingdoms of man and the kingdom of God. So tonight we're going to cover all that Daniel saw or heard up to that leap into the distant future. The angel tells him here, in what we're looking at tonight, about Israel's nearer future. If you've been with us, you know that Daniel's visions have been of Gentile powers that had a big influence on Israel and the Jewish people. And one of the figures that keeps popping up in these visions is a end times world ruler who exalts himself over all things. We refer to him as the Antichrist, but in Daniel's visions, he keeps getting represented as a horn, like on an animal. And the reason why is because in these prophetic visions, horns represent rulers. This horn in particular is very arrogant. It has a mouth, and it boasts great things. He's a ruler that commits such abominable sin and rebellion against God that it results in desolation for earth. Now in chapter 11, Daniel encounters the career of someone in Israel's near future who is who's a forecast of that end times ruler that we call the Antichrist. We're going to start in chapter 10, verse 1 of chapter 10. In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. The message was true, but the appointed time was long, and he understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. Daniel is in his 80s at this point. The Persian king Cyrus the Great had issued an edict allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem in the very first year of his reign. Specifically, he had given them permission to build homes, just basic homes, and to rebuild the temple and restore the worship of Yahweh there. Daniel didn't make the return simply because he was too old. He also had an assignment in the Persian court. No doubt he was involved in overseeing the Jewish exiles that had remained in the region of Babylon. We're going to see him. He's not actually in the city of Babylon. He's out by the Tigris River, which we know was one of the centers where the Jews had been repopulated. And I put together a little bit of a calendar here so that you can see some of the dates for those of you that are interested in taking notes here. Cyrus's decree was issued in 538 BC. It was the first year as the supreme ruler over the Persian Empire. And then a year later, in 537 BC, right about 50,000 Jews made that first return and began rebuilding. And Daniel says the prophecy that he's about to share covers a long time. It covers a great expanse of time. Tonight we're only going to see the near future, and then next week we'll pick it up about halfway, towards the end of chapter 11 and take it all the way through chapter 12 and the end of the book, where he jumps then way out into the future. Okay? But tonight is the kind of the nearer the prophecy. Verse 2. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant food. So, no Big Macs, no Whoppers, no French fries. No meat or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. So, folks, tonight, pardon me for chopping this up, but I'm hoping that as we kind of take smaller sections and take a little bit of time to explain each section, it'll help out. And I don't want to get too technical, but since Daniel gives us dates, I think it best to find where this is on the calendar. In verse 4, he says that the 24th day of the first month he has this vision. The first month of the Jewish calendar is the month of Nisan, not the motor company. The 14th of Nisan does anybody know what's the 14th of Nisan? It's Passover. That's Passover. Followed by a week-long celebration known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that was, as you know, the celebration of their deliverance from bondage in Egypt. Well, Daniel says that he fasted meat and wine for 3 weeks before the 24th of the month. And of course, the word weeks here, we saw it last week and last Wednesday in Daniel chapter 9. Weeks is the Hebrew word for sevens, and it's by the context that you determine if it's 7 days or 7 months or 7 years, right? Here, he's fasting, so it's days. It's literal weeks, okay? So it's 21 days. Daniel began his fast on the 3rd of Nisan. The 1st and the 2nd of Nisan were the beginning of the new religious year, and it was a time of celebration for the Jews. So he's not fasting during that time. But as soon as that feast of the new year was done, Daniel begins his fast on the 3rd. He carried it on over the Passover on the 14th, and then into and through the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which ended on the 22nd of Nisan. And 2 days later, he has this vision. So, Daniel mourned during this time, and here's why. He had received news that the Jews in Jerusalem, the ones that had made the return, were in a bad way. After laying the foundation for the temple, the work stopped. We read about this in the book of Ezra. And the reason why, after they laid the foundation of the temple, why the work stopped, was because the Samaritans that were to the north of them complained to the Persians. And the Samaritans hated the Jews, and they did not want to see Jerusalem rebuilt. And so they complained to the Persian officials that the Jews were rebuilding the defenses of the city of Jerusalem, and that they were going to then rebel against the Persians. And you tell me, do the Jews in Jerusalem have a reputation of rebelling against their masters? Yeah, right? Isn't that what the whole thing with Babylon was, right? Their long history with Babylon. Babylon comes down and conquers them, but is benevolent towards them and just says, you know what, send us tribute money and everything will be fine. What do the Jews do? They rebel. The Romans come, put that rebellion down, put another placeholder in place and leave again. What do the Jews do again? They rebel again. And so they have this history of rebelling against those that have conquered them. And so the Samaritans complained to the Persians and said, they're rebuilding the defenses. They're going to rebel. And the local officials then came and they put a halt to the rebuilding. Now, here's Daniel. He's very interested in what's happening with those that have made the return. He wants to see the temple rebuilt and the worship of God restored. And he gets news, no, everything's stopped. It's halted. And so what does he do? He begins to pray. Verse 24. Now on the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, that is the Tigris. The Tigris River is about 30 miles north and east of Babylon. Daniel may have been there because it was the center of Jewish occupation. And he was most likely there in his official capacity for the Persian court. While he was there, this happens, verse 5. I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girdled with gold of Uphaz. This is the highest kind of, most refined kind of gold. His body was like beryl. This is a gem. His face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. Now listen, commentators are pretty split on whether this is a vision of God the Son or a high-ranking angel. And here's why. Because the description that Daniel gives of this person that he sees looks an awful lot like the description that the Apostle John gives in Revelation chapter 1 of Jesus. We know that it's Jesus there. And so because of the similarity, some people think, well, this is actually a Christophany. It's an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament before the incarnation. And it could be that. Or it might be an angel of high rank designated by his august appearance here. I mean, let me tell you, if you saw this, you'd be terrified, right? And it may be that this is just an angel of very, very high rank. Another possibility is that there are two different divine beings here. Verses 5 through 6 are a Christophany, a vision of the glory of Christ to prepare Daniel for the very hard things that he is about to learn. And then in verse 10 and on, it's an angel who touches and speaks to Daniel. And quite frankly, I think that makes more sense. I think that Daniel is getting a vision here of Christ in his glory. And then an angel comes in verse 10 and speaks to him, okay? That's kind of my view on this. So look at verse 7. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell on them, so that they fled to hide themselves. So this little detail suggests that Daniel is there on some kind of official business. I mean, he has guards, he has assistants that are with him. And while they were aware that something profoundly supernatural was going on, they didn't see anything. They freaked out. They fled. Pansies. Verse 8. Therefore, I was left alone when I saw this great vision, and no strength remained in me, for my vigor was turned to frailty in me, and I retained no strength. Yet I heard the sound of his words, and while I heard the sound of his words, I was in deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. So what Daniel encountered overwhelmed him physically. He swooned, he fainted. Okay, we've said this before. Well, here we see. You guys tell me, is Daniel a holy man? Is he a godly man? Is he one of the most righteous men that we have presented to us in Scripture? Okay, and what happens when he sees an angel? He's on his face, right? Okay, how many of us have wished, man, I wish I could see an angel, right? No, you don't. Now, angels can appear differently. Sometimes, they appear just like strangers, we read, and sometimes people have entertained angels unawares, and so that's very possible. But when you see an angel in their glory, oh man, it would wipe you out. Whenever we have these holy people in the Bible, like Isaiah and Ezekiel and Daniel, the Apostle John, they are all shaken to their core, profoundly changed by what they see when they encounter one of these divine messengers in their glory. And such it was with Daniel. He was acquainted to the point of familiarity with the spiritual realm and all the visions that he had had. But listen, he never got used to them. He sees this angel and he's on his face. So Daniel's reaction models, I think, for how people are going to respond when Jesus comes in his glory. Remember what it says in Philippians, that every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. I don't know about you, but I've talked with some people who are unbelievers, and you share the Lord with them, and a lot of times what they'll say is, well, I don't think that God should allow evil, and why is there evil, and why does bad things happen, and you talk to them. I've even had some people tell me, listen, when I stand before God, I'm going to tell him I thought he messed up. I don't know if you've ever heard Robert De Niro, his famous saying. He was once being interviewed, and, do you believe in God? And he got very angry, and he said, I'll tell you what, when I stand before God, I'm going to tell him, you've got a lot to answer for. No. Let me tell you, Mr. De Niro, when you stand before God, you're going to be silent, you're going to be on your face, and you're going to be on your knee declaring that Jesus Christ is Lord, because that's what the Bible says. That's what's going to happen to all these people. Now, verse 10, here we go. So Daniel's where? He's on his face on the ground, and he's fainted. He's out cold. Verse 10, suddenly a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and on the palms of my hands. So again, verse 9 ends with Daniel passed out, face to the floor. An angel touches him, and notice what happens. He rises to all fours. He's not strong enough to stand yet. And that which is touching the earth, his palms and his knees, are what? They're trembling. The idea is this: when he's in contact with the material realm, it's like there's this tension that's going on between his being in the spiritual realm and in contact with the physical realm. And he's trembling with what's touching the material realm. The idea is this: I think so often we get the idea we live in the real world. You ever talk with somebody who's a skeptic, and you're talking about spiritual things, saying, well, I live in the real world. You know what the real reality is? The eternal reality is spiritual. This is temporary. This is all going to dissolve. But I think so often, even us Christians, we can easily get the idea that the spiritual realm is kind of ethereal, it's kind of abstract, it's sort of not so real, because this is real. We're so used to this. But the reality is, the spiritual realm is the higher reality. It's the higher realm. And it's filled with the glory of God. And do you know what the root of the word for glory is? Chabad in Hebrew. It's that which weighs, that which has substance and weighs. The glory of God is not this, abstract, ethereal thing. It's more real than this because it's eternal. And this is all going to dissolve. So here's Daniel. He's sort of in that place between the spiritual and the physical. And what's touching the physical for him, it's trembling because it's so transient. Verse 11, and he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly beloved. And we looked at that Sunday. Understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. While he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. Daniel has spent his whole life in the physical realm of space, matter, and time. And now that he's carried into the spiritual dimension, he realizes how foreign it is. Though he's standing, he's still weak. And now the angel speaks. Now remember, at this point, Daniel is grieved about the condition of Jerusalem and the Jews who had made the return. He's about to have a vision of some monumentally bad stuff. He's going to see days of immense trouble. He had to be reminded that God is still on his throne and everything is under God's control. And so this heavenly messenger lays a comforting hand on him, raises him to his feet, and he speaks words of comfort to him. And as we saw Sunday, can you just picture Daniel in this place right now where he's bummed out? He spent 21 days fasting and praying. He begins to enter into the spiritual realm. His strength is completely undone. He passes out. He's kind of coming back to consciousness. And what does the angel say to him? Oh man, greatly beloved. Man, how filling to his soul that had to be, to hear that. And he's just had this vision of this glorious being. Okay, verse 12. Then he said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me, how long? 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the later days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come. So the angel was dispatched from heaven the same day that Daniel started to pray. When? 3 weeks before. The delay in his arrival was caused by, he says, the prince of Persia. There was a series of video games years ago called The Prince of Persia. And they made a movie out of it, The Prince of Persia, out of these video games. And let me tell you, this angel was not delayed because he was playing video games or watching a movie. All right? This is the literal Prince of Persia. This was a demonic hindrance. And this raises a huge question. How can an angel be hindered? Now, question. Can a human being hinder an angel? Well, think of this. One angel killed all the firstborn in one night in Egypt. Okay? One angel killed 185,000 Assyrians that were besieging Jerusalem. One angel in one night. So you tell me, can a human hinder an angel? No. Who can hinder an angel? Another angel. A fallen angel. A demon. What we see here is an example of what Paul speaks about in Ephesians 6:12, where he says this, "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." So this angelic messenger was hindered by a demon who's called the Prince of Persia. Now consider verse 1 of chapter 12. Take a look real quick at the first verse of chapter 12. "At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people." Just as the demonic realm is ordered into different ranks, so are the angels of God. God has assigned certain angels to oversee the care of different groups. Israel's chief protector is named Michael. Demons have assignments as well. When the angel was dispatched by God to speak with Daniel, a high-level demon whose assignment was Persia, which now ruled Babylon where Daniel was, tried to hinder him. Now this went on for 3 weeks until Michael came and forced the passage, allowing this heavenly messenger to come to Daniel. And how long was the heavenly messenger delayed? How long? 3 weeks, 21 days. How long had Daniel been praying and fasting? The angel says, I was dispatched the day you started. The angel arrives 21 days later. And this brings up the question that we can ask. What role did Daniel's prayer and fasting have in seeing that angel come? Question. Do your prayers have an impact on the spiritual realm? Absolutely they do. That's the whole point. That's why we pray. So Daniel, it was his prayers, his perseverance in prayer. He set himself to pray until he heard from the Lord, just like he did in chapter 9. May I encourage you, Christian, if you are being pressed to pray, if the Spirit is saying you need to pray about it, you keep praying until you get an answer. You keep praying until you get an answer, or until you sense the Holy Spirit say, okay, that you don't need to pray about that anymore. If you're burdened in prayer, you keep praying. I love Nehemiah. Nehemiah gets a report as well about the distress of the Jews in Jerusalem. And it says that he began to pray, and here's what happened. As he prayed, the burden got heavier. And here's what Nehemiah discerned. Sometimes, as believers, we sense a need to pray about something, and we pray, and then the need lifts. Why? Because we did what God wanted us to. Other times we pray about something, and as we pray, the burden increases because God is saying, keep praying. And listen, if you keep praying and the burden just keeps getting more, you know what it means? God doesn't want you to just pray. He wants you to do something. This is the trigger. This is the way that we know. God wants me to do more than pray. He wants me to do something. So your prayer shifts, and you start saying, Lord, what do you want me to do? And interestingly, He'll show you what to do. He will. Verse 15, when he had spoken such words to me, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. And suddenly, one having the likeness of the sons of men touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke, saying to him who stood before me, my Lord. And by the way, that's like, it's sir. When he says my Lord, he's speaking to an angel here. He's saying, sir, it's a address of dignity. My Lord, because of the vision, my sorrows have overwhelmed me, and I have retained no strength. For how can the servant of my Lord talk with you, my Lord? As for me, no strength remains in me now, nor is any breath left in me. Well, one angel stands before him to give him heaven's message, heaven's answer. Another touches his lips that allows him to speak. And the idea that we can glean is this. When the veil between the spiritual and the material realm is drawn aside, we are poorly equipped to handle it. Daniel, this godly man, he's weak, he's panting. It says his breath left him. Verse 18, then again, the one having the likeness of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man, greatly beloved, fear not. Peace be to you. Be strong. Yes, be strong. And so when he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. This is kind of like, he's not just giving him a pep talk, He's actually giving him that strength as he's speaking it to him. Then he said, "Do you know why I have come to you? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth." Now let's just stop right there. And we stop there because the rest of the verse belongs with what follows. In light of what the angel goes on to reveal to Daniel, here's what this means. You know, we often speak of the real power behind the throne. We've used that phrase all the time, right? Well, the real power behind the throne, or the real power behind the president or the prime minister, and then we talk about who we think is the real power. Well, these princes that are referred to here are demons that are behind the thrones, animating the rulers of Persia and Greece. Satan was hard at work using worldly powers to thwart God's plan. He knows that Israel and the Jews are at the very center of God's plans. And so he works hard at fomenting plans and conspiracies to destroy the Jews. Listen, that's what the whole story of the book of Esther is about, isn't it? It's the enemy animating a man named Haman to get the king of Persia to pass a decree allowing all the Jews to be wiped out. This was a satanic conspiracy to get rid of the Jews. And it's the real motive behind that weird form of racism called anti-Semitism. On Monday, some of us went to the Auschwitz exhibit at the Reagan Library. Interesting in history, why there is this people that has been singled out for such hatred and attempts to get rid of them. Anti-Semitism, sociologists are agreed on this. It's weird. Where does it come from? Why this one group of people are so hated? Well, we know why. Because Satan wants to get rid of them. Why? Because they formed the very core of God's plans. The Messiah came from them. And they are God's instrument for the calendar and for prophecy, you see, as we saw last week in chapter 9. You want to know the real author of the Holocaust? That was Satan. The Nazis were just his tool. But demons weren't the only spiritual entities at work influencing affairs. God's angels were as well. The angel that spoke to Daniel was a high-level angel involved in all of that. And Daniel's prayers were instrumental in determining the outcome of the contest that was taking place in the spiritual realm. And here's a good example of a terrible chapter break placement. Note that there's a parenthesis that opens in verse 21 of chapter 10. It spans the chapter break and then closes in verse 1. So, why split a thought between two chapters? I think what happened, the guy that was assigned breaking the text into chapters took a coffee break here and let's put the ideas together. The last part of verse 21 says, "No one upholds me against these," that is the demon princes of Persia and Greece, "except Michael your prince." And then verse 1, chapter 11, "Also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I, even I, stood up to confirm and strengthen him." Now that last him refers to Michael. And the word stood, it's a military term. It refers to taking and holding a position. So let's read it like this. "I, even I, dug in to confirm and strengthen Michael, the prince of Israel." Okay? So there's this spiritual battle that's going on. Michael's the main warrior, if you will, but this angel, probably Gabriel, comes to assist Michael because he needed the assistance. Now, scholars think that the angel speaking with Daniel is Gabriel, who's already given him the revelations regarding Israel's future in chapters 8 and 9. You may remember that it was Gabriel that came to Zacharias, the father of John the Baptist, to announce the birth of his special son. Gabriel appeared to who else? Mary, to announce the conception of Christ. He comes to Daniel to give understanding of the future of Israel. It seems that he, that is Gabriel, and Michael have a joint ministry on behalf of the Jews and Israel. It's like Gabriel is the messenger, Michael is the muscle. And Gabriel lends assistance, of course, when Michael needs it. Now, such opposition came in the first year of Darius's reign. There was an attempt to bring the Jews into disfavor with Darius. Do you remember the plot to condemn Daniel? Remember that? This was Darius that was reigning. These guys come and pass a law that no one's allowed to pray except to you. You only. We know what happens, right? These guys were trying to get rid of Daniel. The result was Darius issuing a proclamation honoring Israel's God because God miraculously delivered Daniel from the lions. Michael and Gabriel turned the attempt of Israel's enemies to destroy into a blessing. And this is likely what the angel is referring to. There's a kind of angelic tag team who fight for and assist Israel, Michael and Gabriel. Well, verse 2, and now I will tell you the truth. Okay, folks, listen, here we go. Get ready because this is just going to be wild. Behold, he says, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. So 4 more rulers would rise over Persia. So here from history, we know that after Cyrus, his son Cambyses ruled. He was followed by Smerdis, interesting name. Then came Darius the First, not the Darius that we're reading about here. After Darius the First came Xerxes, known in the book of Esther as Ahasuerus. It's the same guy. He ruled from 485 to 465 BC. Xerxes was the most powerful, influential, and wealthy of the 4, just as is foretold here. Now, the Persians reached their climax and showed their greatest power under Xerxes' rule when they invaded Greece in 480 BC. Now, you know that I would love to launch into a whole history of the Persian-Greek wars at this point, and be thankful I'm not going to. But I would love to. Let me condense the tale to this. The Greek city-states in the mainland of Greece planted dozens of colonies all over the west coast of Asia Minor. So you'll see there on the map, the red part are the Greek city-states, the mainland of Greece. The yellow is the Persian Empire. The Persians extended their empire all the way over into Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, until they ran into, right up to the coastal area, the Greek city-states had gone across the Aegean Sea and had planted a bunch of colonies over there. Ephesus, Troas, all of those cities that you're familiar with on the coast there. And so that green area that you see is the area of those Greek colonies. And they were very wealthy colonies, and they were sending all their wealth back to the Greek city-states. Lance, don't do this. The Greek city-states, Greece, the way the geography of Greece doesn't allow big cities. It's hills and then small valleys where you can grow a few crops, and there's limited water supply. And so the Greek city-states, they would produce enough food for themselves, and they would have a lot of kids, but then they would outgrow their area. And so they would go plant another city someplace else until Greece is filled now. You can't put any more cities there, and the cities can never get very big because of the geography. But they kept having kids. And the Greeks were amazing sailors. From the earliest days, the Greeks were amazing sailors because they have amazing harbors all around their land. And so what they did is they stuck their kids on boats and they said, go start someplace else. And they did. They sailed across the Aegean Sea and planted all these colonies where it was a lot more spread out. And so these cities actually became way bigger than the mother cities back there. But they were colonies, and they kept sending all of their wealth and all the food and everything else back to the mother cities back in the mainland. So here come the Persians. They arrive and they subjugate all those Greek colonies. And you tell me, did the Greeks like being ruled by the Persians? Heck no. They didn't like that. And the mother cities back on the Greek mainland were furious about it. These Persians came and they ripped off our holdings. So the Greeks ended up abhorring being subject to Persia. The colonies rebelled, assisted mainly by the city of Athens and Eritrea. When the Persian capital of Asia Minor at Sardis was conquered and burned by the Greeks, the Persians vowed revenge. Xerxes amassed what was probably the ancient world's biggest army, several 100,000, and they marched west to invade the Greek mainland, not just the colonies. They went over there, recaptured the colonies, and they said, you know what? We need to go teach these Greeks a lesson. And so they marched up around the top of the Aegean Sea and came across and started coming down into the Greek mainland. Notice what it says there at the end of verse 2. He shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. The Persian navy sent hundreds of ships. Though at the Battle of Thermopylae, a small force of Spartans delayed the Persians, it didn't stop them, and they marched into Greece. They conquered and burned Athens and overran much of Greece. But the Persian fleet was bested. It was defeated at the Battle of Salamis, and the Persian army was left stranded. They couldn't get home. The Greeks rallied and forced the Persians to retreat. Isn't that exciting? That's exciting stuff. Verse 3, then a mighty king shall rise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Now, Xerxes' invasion created fierce and enduring hatred of the Persians among the Greeks. It's really hard for us to relate to this. Imagine you're the Greeks. You have this amazing civilization, and these barbarians come over and they conquer you. I mean, they destroy your cities, and then they leave. And the Greeks that were left behind, they have this now enduring hatred for the Persians. And we have to get even. We can't let this stand. In just a few years, the Greeks conquered Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, and Persia. Nothing and no one was able to stop this new leader named Alexander. Whatever he wanted to do, he accomplished. Verse 4, and when he has arisen, the Hebrew means is when he stood up, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others beside these. When Alexander died at the age of just 32, the vast territory that he had conquered fell not to his children, because he didn't really have any, but to his four main generals. The area was too large for them, and many of the border territories reverted to native rule. Verse 5, also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So the Ptolemies, who ruled Egypt, were called the kings of the south. Of course, they're in Egypt, so they're to the south, right? While the Seleucids, ruling from Syria over the entire eastern Mediterranean, were called the kings of the north. These two were in a perpetual struggle with the boundary between them constantly moving either north or south, whoever was the stronger force at the time. And the boundary between the Seleucids in the north and the Ptolemies in Egypt, where does it lie? In Israel. And that's why Israel ends up becoming kind of this battlefield between the kings of the north and the kings of the south. Several battles were fought between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies for control of the rich trade routes that passed through Israel. Now, verse 5 describes the beginning of the trouble between them. Before Seleucus was able to control his region, he fought with other powerful military leaders. And at one point, check this out, he had to flee to Ptolemy, who was ruling in Egypt. Ptolemy backed Seleucus' efforts to take control of the north. So finally, Seleucus sets up shop in Syria. He becomes king over the entire eastern part of Alexander's empire, and then he decides, even though Ptolemy had given him refuge, he decides to go to war against Ptolemy. And talk about ungrateful. Now, verses 6 through 20 give details of the continuous conflict between these two powers. And I realize this is going to get really detailed, and you might be thinking, well, why can't you just summarize this? And the answer is no, I can't. People who have read War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, one of the things they'll say is, too many names. Too many names, okay? This passage is very Tolstoy-esque. We're going to get a lot of different rulers here. The angel does not supply any names, but here's what's fun. History does. And we're going to show you all the names of these people, and you're going to memorize them, and there's going to be a quiz. Okay, here we go. Verse 6. At the end of some years, they shall join forces, for the daughter, watch this, of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. Whoa. Though the Ptolemies and the Seleucids were bitter enemies, they eventually forged a truce. Now watch this, because this is just amazing. Their alliance was sealed by the marriage of the southern king's daughter, Berenice, to the northern king, Antiochus II. You got it? All right. The marriage didn't last because Antiochus had to divorce his first wife, Laodice, so he could marry Berenice. Laodice had Berenice assassinated. Pointed at in verse 6 when it says she's given up. Not only was she assassinated, her entire retinue, all of the people that she had brought with her, including her son, the prince of Syria, were also executed. Laodice then poisoned her ex-husband and made her son, Seleucus II, the king. Verse 7, but from a branch of her roots, one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So Berenice's brother was Ptolemy III. He succeeded to Egypt's throne and set out to avenge his sister. He was victorious over the Syrian army, put Laodice to death, and returned to Egypt with many spoils. All of that's foretold there. Now, side note, it's these prophecies. Do you see how detailed this is? It's because these prophecies are so detailed and came to pass so perfectly in history that skeptics say this had to have been written after it happened. It had to have been. And that was the position of skeptics and critics of the Bible for years until they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then they said, oh my goodness, all of this was foretold before it happened in incredible detail. Okay, verse 9. Also, the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. However, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. So after the humiliating defeat by Ptolemy III, Seleucus II, who's the king of the north, tried an unsuccessful invasion of Egypt. His son, Seleucus III, was quickly killed after only 4 months by conspirators. So his brother, Antiochus III, became a ruler at just 18 years of age. He reigned for 36 years. So these two sons of Seleucus II, Seleucus III and Antiochus III, tried to restore the prestige of Syria that had been lost to Ptolemy III. Egypt controlled all of the territory north to the borders of Syria, including the land of Israel. So Antiochus succeeded in driving the Egyptians back to their northern border. So now he comes down, he takes Israel. Now, verse 11, and the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands. But he will not prevail, For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Okay, you tell me, is this highly detailed? Super detailed. When have we ever seen any kind of prophecy with this kind of detail? So the king of the south at this point is Ptolemy IV. He was the one that was driven back by Antiochus III. Once Antiochus had the Egyptians bottled up, he decided to stage a massive invasion of Egypt. He paused at the border to amass and organize his troops. He already had a vast force, but he knew that he was going to need more to make a successful invasion of the Egyptian heartland. So while he waited for his strength to increase, Ptolemy IV counterattacked and slaughtered thousands of the Syrians. Antiochus returned with another much larger force and turned back the Egyptians. All of that is foretold here. The civilizations of the Middle East kept records of all of this, and they verify what Gabriel foretells. It all came to pass exactly as foretold here. Now, verse 14. Now, in those times, many shall rise up against the king of the south. By the way, we're getting to the kind of the main character here. Gabriel's setting the stage for us. Now, in those times, many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also, violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. The Seleucids in Syria, remember they're up in the north, weren't Ptolemy's only enemy. The Macedonians joined Antiochus III against Egypt. Many Jews also joined, hoping to gain independence from both Egypt and Syria by seeing the two powers ruin each other. That never happened. Antiochus consolidated his control of Israel, from which he expelled the Egyptians. The fortified city of verse 15 here is Sidon in Lebanon, which Antiochus captured in 203 BC. Now here we go, verse 17. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him, thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or before him. Threatened now by the Romans who were beginning to move into this region. This is at a period of time when Rome is really starting to move out. They've consolidated the Italian peninsula, and now they're starting to move out. Their population is exploding because of all of the wealth that's coming into their cities. They know that they need the food that is grown in Egypt because they're not going to be able to provide for their population. So they're starting to come down and into the eastern part of the Mediterranean, especially they want Egypt. So they're starting to move into the area and express their will. Antiochus sought a resolution to the conflict between Egypt and Syria. Watch this, by giving his young daughter, anybody know her name? Cleopatra, to marry the 7-year-old Ptolemy V of Egypt. 7 years old, it's kind of young. Antiochus thought that the young king would be overawed by his daughter, Cleopatra, the first, by the way, and that she would then be the real ruler of Egypt. That Egypt would just become a puppet of Syria. So this is Cleopatra the First, not the famous Cleopatra of the time of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. She was Cleopatra the Seventh. Okay, so this is the first Cleopatra. Antiochus' plan, Cleopatra's father, backfired. So she marries this boy who's way younger than she is. But he is a Ptolemy. He's being, even though he's only 7, he's being raised to rule. And it doesn't take long before, as he gets into his young teen years, she falls madly in love with him. And she says, no, I'm not going to help my dad. I'm going to help Ptolemy rule Egypt. And she turns against the Syrians. She turns against her father's kingdom. Great love story there. She's a bit of a cougar, but we'll let that go. Verse 18. After this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many. But a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. So thwarted in trying to take control of Egypt, Antiochus, again, this is the third, turned his attention west towards Asia Minor and Greece. But Rome had its own plans and were not going to tolerate some also ran messing them up. Listen, the Romans have now moved into Greece. And here comes Antiochus. He can't take Egypt, so what does he do? He goes up and he extends his reach across Asia Minor. He wants to go and conquer Greece. And the Romans are like, no, it's already ours. But he attacks them. Oh, fool. Antiochus hoped to rival Alexander's feat by conquering Greece, so he invaded. Rome dispatched several legions, and the Seleucids were thoroughly whooped. Assuming the Seleucids were fantastically wealthy, Rome laid a huge tribute on them. Antiochus returned home. In 188, he dies. He returns home, heartbroken that his attempts to take Egypt and then go over and take Greece have been thwarted. He dies. Okay, here we go. Wrapping it up. There shall arise in his place, that is Antiochus III, one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom. And what is the glorious kingdom? Israel. And what does he do? He imposes what? Why? We just talked about it. Why does he impose taxes on Israel? What had the Romans just done? They had told the Seleucids, you have to pay us this huge tribute payment. So this is where the taxes come from. But within a few days, he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. Antiochus III's son was Seleucus IV, who heavily taxed his subjects to pay that massive fine that Rome had demanded. He was poisoned by his treasurer, who thought a policy of appeasement was beneath the Seleucids. So his treasurer poisoned him. Now, as we come to verse 21, we are now introduced to a colossal bad boy. This guy is so foul, his actions so abominable, they prefigure the career of the Antichrist. His career is described, and then it's blended right into that of the last great world ruler who will follow the example of his rise to power and his reign of terror. These verses describe a guy who's known as Antiochus IV, nicknamed Epiphanes, which means manifested one or illustrious one. It was a claim of deity. He was the son of Antiochus III, so the brother of Seleucus IV. But Seleucus was poisoned, and so the brother takes over. Antiochus IV ruled from 175 to 163 BC, and he's given much attention here as all the rest combined. So verse 21, and in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Antiochus IV is called a vile person because of his policy of deceit. He used it to commit terrible crimes. He took the title Epiphanes, which I said means illustrious one, because he claimed to be a god. The throne rightly belonged to Seleucus IV's son, but he was being held hostage in Rome. At the time that Seleucus died, Antiochus IV was in Athens. He quickly ran home saying, oh, my brother's son is the real king. I'm just a caretaker because he can't come. As soon as he's accepted as the regent, as the caretaker, he kills anybody that was supportive of the real king. Kills them all. As foretold, Antiochus didn't come to the throne by rightful succession. He seized it by intrigue, conspiracy, bribery. Verse 22, with the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. Antiochus staged a successful invasion of Egypt in 170 BC. The prince of the covenant, here at the end of verse 22, refers to the Jewish high priest, prince of the covenant. Because listen, there is no king in Israel at this point. There's no king. So who's the ruler? It's a guy by the name of Onias, who's the high priest. He's the high priest at this point. The temple has been rebuilt, by the way. The Jews were allowed to rebuild. And he's serving as the high priest. And since there was no one else to be the governor, he ends up becoming the de facto ruler. He's the prince of the covenant with God. So Antiochus has Onias murdered. He has him assassinated. And the reason why is because he wouldn't give up the worship of God for the worship of Zeus. Verse 23, and after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. Antiochus IV was one of those rare people who enjoyed a huge amount of luck. Let me just put it this way. Have you ever known anybody who just seemed like everything they did just worked? Like they were so lucky. Just an inordinate amount of luck. What is luck? Luck is just chance. It's just numbers. You know, you flip a coin and you guess what it's going to be. It's just, you don't know. You're not going to. But there are some people. I remember some people in school, rare, but it just seemed like they always won games of chance. When you're playing a game and it's dice and it's like, why do you always throw the right numbers? They always win at Yahtzee. Don't you hate that? They always draw the right cards. Bless you. Okay, I think sometimes the enemy can get in and manipulate the numbers, manipulate chance. And so we say it's luck, it's just the fall of the dice or the fall of the numbers. But I think sometimes the enemy can get in because he's doing something, he's trying to calculate something. And this guy, Antiochus IV, he was just one of those guys where it just seemed like everything fell his way. Just one thing right after another. Though he never had the support of the people, he managed to sway the few who held power. He did so not by inspiring them with some great vision. He bribed them. He flattered them. Being the consummate creep, he was able to play to the creepiness of others. He and his little gang were into one thing: power, getting it, and keeping it. And let me tell you, they were genius at it. Verse 24, he shall enter peaceably into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. Antiochus used bribes and intrigue to keep his enemies off balance. He pretended to be a friend. He pretended to be an ally. He would even give them money, and the whole time he's conspiring to get rid of them. And it worked time after time. Verse 25, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. Okay, so here we go again. You got a Seleucid ruler, and what's he want to do? He wants to go down and invade Egypt. We're back to the same thing again. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both those kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. So this gives a little background on how Antiochus IV came to rule Egypt for a short time. Yeah, that's right, you heard me. The Seleucid king ended up ruling Egypt for a short time. He brought a vast army against Egypt. He defeated them. He had his agents working for him in the Egyptian court who betrayed the Egyptian king, Antiochus, then captured in battle. When the Egyptians put that king's brother on the throne, Antiochus feigned friendship with the captive king and offered to put him back on the throne if he would allow Antioch to be the real ruler, kind of a secret ruler. The Egyptian king agreed, intending full well to break the agreement as soon as he persuaded his brother to ally with him against Antiochus. So needing more troops before making his assault on Egypt, Antiochus heads home. Watch this. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. Antiochus took a lot of loot back to his homeland. He had sacked Egypt. He takes it back to his homeland, intending to use it as bribes and fund a new campaign to take Egypt once for all. His return takes him through Israel. That's right. You see, you're starting to get it now. He's taken this huge force down, conquered Egypt, right? Now he's on his way back. He has to pass through Israel. Upset that his adventure had not secured Egypt finally, he takes out his frustration on the Jews. And he does so by desecrating the temple in Jerusalem. This is when he murders the high priest Onias, replaces the high priest with corrupt men who promise to do his bidding, and convert the Jews to Greek culture and religion. With the help of a corrupt high priest, Antiochus, watches this, enters the temple. He takes the gold and the silver furnishings that were being used in the temple service. This was only the beginning of his violations of the temple. It's going to get much worse. Verse 29, at the appointed time, he shall return and go toward the south. You see, it's time. This is it. He's got his big army. He's coming down, but it shall not be like the former or later. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore, he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So here's another example of a bad text break. Verse 30 ought to end here. 2 years after verses 25 through 28, in 168 BC, Antiochus IV moved against Egypt yet again. And watch this. Here we go. He defeated the Egyptian forces, pushing them, the last of the Egyptian forces, to the city of Alexandria. So he's virtually conquered all of Egypt except the city of Alexandria. As he prepares for the final assault, notice what it says. Ships from Cyprus came. Now think history. Who's on those ships? What people? There you go. There you go. The Romans. The Romans. So here he is. He's ready for his final assault on Alexandria. This is it. And all of a sudden he gets a message that the Romans want to parley with him. And he says, oh, Romans, that's right. My dad was defeated by the Romans. Now they're coming to Egypt. Ooh, they're coming our way. We went to them in Greece before. Now they're coming to us. Okay, I'll meet with him. One guy, one Roman diplomat shows up. One guy. He's thinking it's going to be a whole delegation of Romans, right? One guy walks up to him, dressed in Roman armor, hands him a letter from the Roman Senate. And it says, you better go home. And Antiochus IV reads the letter and he says, I need to confer with my generals. And the diplomat, this guy, he takes a stick, he takes his riding crop, and he walks around Antiochus and he draws a circle on the ground around Antiochus, and he says, you have to give me an answer before you leave that circle or it's war. True story. And Antiochus says, okay, we'll go home. So his big plans, right? He's marched this huge army down. They've been victorious. He can taste the victory. It's right there. It's finally, all my ancestors have not been able to conquer Egypt, but I'm going to do it. And now he has to go home. And he has to go through where to get home? You tell me. Is he happy or is he upset? I was going to use the other word. He's very upset. He was humiliated. Verse 3:30 says that he was grieved. He had no other option but to go home. And the aggrieved often vent by raging, and such is Antiochus' outlet now. Last part of verse 30. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. Antiochus was bullied back down by someone bigger, so as he heads home, he decides to beat up on an innocent bystander. As before, it's the Jews who bear the brunt of his rage. For a second time, Antiochus takes out his frustration on the Jews and their temple. He was determined to force Greek culture on all of his lands and absolutely hated the stubborn Jews who refused his Hellenizing reforms. The Jews had learned their lesson against idolatry in their captivity in Babylon. So there's no way they're going to worship idols. And here comes this guy, you're going to worship idols. So of course they opposed him. He persecuted religious Jews with glee. Truth be told, some Jews were all for the Greek ways and religion. Some of them actually were advocates for him. Antiochus favored these renegades, and he put them in positions of power. Then, in an attempt to force compliance, he desecrated the temple and abolished the daily sacrifices, just as was foretold here. He sent his general, Apollonius, with 22,000 soldiers into Jerusalem on what was supposed to be a peacekeeping mission between the religious Jews and now the Jews that wanted to become Hellenists, Greeks. They were fighting over control of the temple, and so he sends in this peacekeeping force, and as soon as they get there, they wipe out all the religious Jews, killed 40,000 of them. They attacked on the Sabbath, killed women and children, took slaves, plundered and burned the city. And then Antiochus instituted a policy that made illegal every observance of the Mosaic law. Jews were forbidden from keeping the feasts, circumcising their sons, observing the Sabbath, and all copies of God's word were rounded up and burned. At the height of the atrocities, on December 16th of 167 BC, he erected a statue of Zeus in the temple and sacrificed a pig on the altar. And yet, many of the Jews were won over, as it says in verse 32 here, were won over to him at this point, and here's why. Because it got to the point where either you become Greek or you die. But through it all, there was a remnant that remained faithful to God, refusing to engage in these abominations. These dissenters had to flee Jerusalem, of course, because if they stayed there, they were going to get killed. Antiochus died in Persia a few years later. The last part of verse 32 is going to be what we're going to look at on Sunday. Now we wrap it up, verse 33. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So Jews who refused Antiochus' reforms were persecuted and martyred. That word fall in verses 33 and 34 means to stumble due to adversity. It's the idea of suffering that's so great it causes someone to stagger. And that's what happened to the Jews who wanted to remain faithful to God. They just were brutalized and not much was left. Resistance did eventually arise, and I'll just cut this real short, in what's known as the Maccabean Revolt. There were some Jews that remained faithful. They staged this little rebellion against the Syrians. We'll take a little bit more look at this on Sunday. And that rallied other Jews. They kind of took courage from that. And pretty soon a full-scale rebellion happened against the Syrians that drove the Assyrians from the land. And that led to then the new ruling family in Israel known as the Hasmoneans. But we'll cut to the chase because we're out of time. Now we've seen, listen, 135 specific prophecies so far in chapter 11. 135. You looked at 135 prophecies so far, all of which have been fulfilled. With verse 36, we're introduced to the rest of Gabriel's message, which commentators and historians are unable to find a fulfillment for. Everything we've seen so far happened in history. But from here on, no. Why? Because it looks now out to the future. And that's where we'll pick it up next Wednesday. But I want to end by considering how Antiochus IV points to the Antichrist. Well, what have we learned about Antiochus IV Epiphanes? He's not a legitimate ruler. He gains position, how? By deceit and bribery. That's going to be a picture of the Antichrist. He wields great military power. He does away with God's word and ways. He defiles the temple and sets up an abomination. He takes the title of deity, Epiphanes, which means the illustrious or the manifested one. Is the Antichrist going to claim to be God? When he's thwarted, when his plans are thwarted, he rages and takes it out on God's people. Exactly what we're going to see in the Antichrist. All of that is a forecast of that great end times ruler that we refer to as the Antichrist.